will choose a new path, but I will never cooperate with those bastards.
Hello there guys, in this review I'm going to be giving my experience playing Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Now this game may seem like a pretty random pick from my collection, but it felt necessary because before I never really found myself particularly invested in the AC franchise. I personally wasn't able to fully grasp what made the franchise so popular besides the main characters and how stylish their outfits were. However, it wasn't until I found myself in a bit of a pirate mood and decided to give the franchise another go with Assassin's Creed 4. So Black Flag's story begins in the year 1715 and takes place in the Caribbean during the golden age of piracy. You play as Edward Kenway, a Welsh sailor who dreams of greater things. Not wanting to live off food that makes him want to throw up, he takes his chances as a privateer in the British Royal Navy. This, however, leads him being washed up on a shore after a violent storm, and he comes in contact with one of the assassins. Upon killing him and taking his uniform, he begins his journey for fame and fortune as a ruthless pirate captain. This does eventually lead him into the millennium-old conflict between the Assassins and the Templars, two secretive factions with different views on how the world should work, and who are fighting over ancient artifacts that would bring the Templars in particular a step forward towards world domination, something which the Assassins in turn are trying to stop from happening. Now, despite the series' yearly release schedule and similar gameplay features, Ubisoft has aimed to keep the series fresh, mainly through introducing players to a different time in history. And from the beginning, Black Flag does feel familiar in its combat and stealth, which can work against the game in some ways. But what is the most significant change that the game brings is its unique approach to open world gaming, which immediately feels both original for the series and for games overall. Instead of comprising of one gigantic landmass where you run from one corner to the next, the game instead consists of multiple islands, cities and towns, all connected via the Caribbean Sea, which takes up most of the map. At the same time, Black Flag makes you captain of your very own pirate ship, the Jackdaw, as you go around sailing on the sea, hunting ships for loot, finding treasure and visiting cities like Havana and Kingston to take part in story missions. The ship-based exploration and combat have been the biggest selling points of the game and are what make Black Flag so fun to play from the start. As you journey, a huge amount of your time is spent hunting down and fighting against Imperial ships and convoys, primarily to loot their cargo in order to upgrade the Jackdaw. The ship-to-ship combat immediately feels spectacular even from level 1, and gets progressively more chaotic as you fight larger enemies in harsher environments. The exhilaration you feel when colliding with an enemy ship, firing your side cannons at every chance you get, is pretty much second to none in this game, as you deal heavy damage to the ship's hull and set it ablaze. Your side cannons are also accompanied by your chain cannons, which stun enemies from a distance, heavy cannons that deal more damage from close range, rivet guns that hit at critical moments, and flaming barrels that are useful for damaging enemies from behind and when you need to retreat and prevent ships from pursuing you. The Jackdaw can even be equipped with a battering ram that can be used to charge into enemies and deal them huge amounts of damage if they aren't fast enough to avoid you, which is always awesome. All these different weapons are really satisfying to use and make battles against stronger enemies way more intense as you desperately try to use everything at your disposal and anticipate your next attack as they cool down. The variety of weapons does also do a decent job of encouraging you to plan out your attacks and learn how to overcome a whole fleet of ships and plan escape routes if by chance you are outgunned. The combat system also consists of a boarding mechanic. Once the ship is dealt enough damage, you're given the ability to board it and take on its crew. If the fight turns in your favour, which is very likely, you'll be able to deal with the remains of the ship as you see fit and loot the cargo it's carrying. These resources consist of wood and metal, which can be used to upgrade the Jackdaw's hull and armor and make its weapons more powerful, as well as cloth, which allows you to craft different coloured sails. Leftover cargo like rum, can also be sold to make extra money on the side, which will also be needed to craft that new equipment you've been waiting for. These upgrades do just enough to keep you determined to hunt down ships, though not so much for the reason to better your chances, but because of how satisfying it is to watch your ship transform visually as you add more defenses and colours. I also found it especially fun to sail using black sails, as it immediately reminded me of the Black Pearl from the Caribbean movies. While the ship combat overall is excellent, it's also bolstered by the game's fantastic presentation and control mechanics. The ship's slow movement and controls feel appropriately sluggish as you drive this huge vessel across the water. Other small features, such as the third-person view that's accessed through pressing the X button, do a great job of making the experience more special. The way the crew responds to your actions is also an excellent touch added to the game. They cheer when you land a critical hit on an enemy ship, and even sing at your command as you travel from island to island.
Tabacchio, tabacchio, the sailor loves his bacchio. So early in the morning, the sailor likes his bottom.
This does a great job of adding to that sense of adventure and even some camaraderie, even if I wished you were able to interact with the crew much more, as they felt really more like nobodies operating the ship instead of people you really cared about. But what's definitely my favourite aspect of the presentation and what makes the experience so much more fun is the game's dynamic weather effects. One moment you could be travelling on a calm day before being immediately bombarded by a storm, causing torrential rain and high waves. Other events like tornadoes can appear in spectacular fashion and could drag the Jackdaw closer in, causing it to take more damage if you aren't careful. These weather events also heighten the intensity of naval conflicts, especially the larger scale siege battles, as you desperately try to destroy the fort's defences while trying to navigate through the rain and wind. Engaging in battle during a storm is hands down my favourite moment in the entire game, and is an event that really got my heart going the most. The effort placed into the game's presentation also extends to the rest of the game besides the Jackdaw. The environments are bright and colourful and very saturated. Small remote islands you explore are lush with the flora and fauna, with wildlife lurking about, and cities like Havana and Kingston look beautiful as you walk through their crowded streets and run across rooftops. Lastly, the graphics still look pretty decent even today, and character models, especially the major ones, give off enough emotions in their facial animations to make them much more relatable during cutscenes.
Keep talking.
However, in spite of the positives the mechanics and presentation bring, the combat as a whole also represents one of the biggest problems I have with the game, and one which I think has persisted with the whole franchise, and that is its general lack of difficulty. While you are able to upgrade the Jackdaw, you do feel pretty powerful from the start, and ships, especially the smaller ones, crumble very easily. You really need to go out of your way in the game and take on an entire fleet pretty much to really put yourself in real danger. But other than that, one-on-one battles will almost certainly end in your favour without danger of getting killed. And as you upgrade your defences and weapons, this becomes equally the case with the larger frigates and warships you face later on in the game. It doesn't help also that they rarely switch up their tactics, and with all the weapons at your disposal, their health decrease really rapidly without much effort. It almost became discouraging for me to upgrade any further, as I knew that while I was trying to better my game against the legendary ships, I was making the experience even easier with lesser adversaries I would fight along the way. So by the end of the game, you feel like you've felled literally thousands of ships regardless of size, and the practice of destroying one, boarding its deck and overpowering its crew eventually became far too routine. The size and endurance of larger ships and the inclusion of the more powerful enemies does help to an extent to make fights lengthier, but the experience ultimately becomes tedious after some time, especially against foes who no longer put up anywhere close to a decent fight. The lack of difficulty also extends to fights between Edward and the soldiers you fight on the ground through hand-to-hand combat, and this is partly to do with the combat's basic control structure. Combat encounters consist of the constant spanning of the square button to attack, with the occasional counter to block an intercepting strike. It's a hugely simplistic system that is made worse by how little damage enemies take before falling apart. They crumble way too easily by your swords, and the game doesn't add much variety as you progress further in the story. It has many mechanics that have obviously been compared to the Batman Arkham games, and while the combat in those games can sometimes feel simple, they made up for it by introducing a lot of different enemy types of varying attacks to make players plan out their methods of attack much more within a limited time frame. With Black Flag, on the other hand, the game only really introduces 3 main enemy types, including the basic sword infantry, brutes, and gunners who stand from a distance or up high and shoot at you, encouraging you to watch out while fighting. These types demand you plan out attacks to some extent, but even when hugely outnumbered, you're able to overpower these crowds with ease as long as you press the right buttons at the right times. It doesn't help also that the enemy AI is completely inept at many times. A few will just attack you head on without much thought, and others will just stand around waiting for the guy in front to get killed instead of ganging up on you. There was even a time when I was fighting a brute who was throwing bombs and making other loud noises, and a couple of soldiers just a few meters away didn't even react. The combat does have some redeeming qualities, like its pretty great fight choreography and animations, as you fight multiple bad guys with your twin swords, and battles can be more exhilarating as you fight alongside other crew members and NPCs in more chaotic situations. There are even some pretty cool counter moves like dragging a soldier in front of you and using him as a human shield against a gunner. When you're not fighting head-on, you'd most likely be stealthing around, and stealth, however, in my experience fares much better and provides a lot more satisfaction in killing soldiers than the combat does. When trying to sneak through a level completely unnoticed, the game I found to be pretty difficult as you attempt to weave between patrolling guards and try to plan out your route on the fly by looking out for the next bush or cart of straw to hide in. Guards, especially gunners, are really well placed, which makes it easy to get spotted even at night, and this does a really good job actually of encouraging you to properly observe your surroundings before making any daring moves. Emerging from the shadows or making a jump on an enemy to take them down silently is still gratifying to play out, and this is made better when you can literally dash forward and slam into someone as you both collide into a bush. What I especially liked adding onto this is the variety of tools and gadgets that the game gives you to better your chances. Tools like smoke bombs allow you to stealth kill in the open without being seen, whilst other tools like the sleep darts can neutralize enemies for a small amount of time, whereas even better, the berserker darts turn enemies against one another. One of the coolest tools, however, easily has to be the rope darts, which you acquire later on in the game, which can be used to pull enemies towards you and can even lynch enemies as you hang them from a tree branch. There are a few annoyances like not being able to go prone or crouch, which I felt was a pretty fundamental feature of any stealth game, but for the most part, Black Flag manages to be a pretty solid stealth game that fares much better as one when compared to its combat side, even if the Eagle Sight can make some stealth missions feel a bit too easy at times.
Of course, sir! Captain Mendoza is happy to pay you!
What makes ground gameplay so much better, however, is how the game uses movement and parkour, which makes exploration on the ground all the more entertaining as you run across rooftops, jump on top of structures, and climb tall buildings. This is definitely one of those games where you will spend a lot of time running around just for the sake of it. I did especially love many of the climbing mechanics and how they combined with stealth kills to take out enemies without being seen. Movement can be quite cumbersome though at times, as you can pretty easily run into walls and perform moves you weren't intending to do, which can be frustrating. Now, it being an open world game, Black Flag thankfully does have plenty of activities and things to do, and much of the side activity is made up of exploring the world on board the Jackdaw, uncovering special items and treasure, and looting the vast array of islands, cities, and hidden places throughout the game. There are literally dozens of small islands you can explore for loot, as well as Mayan temples which hold special keys to an impressive looking armor set. The diving bell lets you search underwater regions for blueprints of upgrades while avoiding sharks. Resources and animal skins can be sold at trading posts for extra money, which also allow you to buy better equipment like swords, pistols and new outfits. And at some point you are even given your own hideout, which you can upgrade to include more posts to trade in materials, as well as a bar in your own house. This itself was a pretty cool idea at first, though I didn't really pay much attention to it and really just stuck to using the same buildings throughout the world as I travelled. Some of my favourite confrontations include the fort battles I mentioned earlier, which are quite a lot of fun and reveal more of the map when defeated, as well as the legendary ships placed on each corner of the map, which provides some of the more intense fights in the game and were some of the few ships that actually forced me to plan ahead extensively and encouraged me to memorize their attack patterns.
Working on it, Hardy, sir! Fire! Fire!
You could also come across assassination contracts, which give you an assignment to take out a special target for a small reward. Because of their nature, the targets lack the characterization of the more story-driven missions, but these assassination contracts nevertheless act as acceptably small distractions that test your stealth skills, and I appreciate a lot about how they reward you for not engaging in combat, which I personally always try to do. The game also has a mountain of collectibles to find, ranging from chests to animus fragments and song sheets, which unlock a new song for your crew to sing while you're on your trip in the Jackdaw. Finding all of these rewards you with 100% completion for every city and area you find them in, and as a bit of a completionist, this is where the game for me became a real slog though. Especially since many tiny islands consist of just one of these chests, and you are forced to lower the anchor, swim, open the chest, and then swim back to the ship to continue onwards. It really felt like an incredibly weak and lazy way of encouraging exploration, and for me sets an example of just how not to do collectibles in a game actually. In the end, I would definitely recommend you just ignore trying to find every one of these collectibles, as it really grinds the game to a halt and takes a lot of the excitement out of the journey. But besides that, the side missions I enjoyed the most included the more narrative-driven ones, such as the Templar hunts, which you unlock once you join up with the assassins. Here you meet up with an assassin and follow them in various scenarios to hunt down a high-ranking member of the Templars. Every time you kill one of them, you are rewarded with a key that unlocks a cabinet containing a cool-looking Templar outfit.
The Templar did not show himself. You will have your key next time.
No, Anto, there is no next time.
When you discover your conscience, or admit how badly you want the key, there will be a next time.
Many of these missions follow a similar structure, which is to find the location of the target, stay close to listen in on their conversation as they walk, stay out of sight at all times, then confront or assassinate them so you can progress. These missions become lengthier and more complicated over time, as you're tasked with navigating around armed guards at one point and have to think harder on how to keep within the listening field whilst remaining hidden. While I did definitely at first enjoy the challenge these missions bring and how they test your skills in navigating while in stealth, this kind of mission design does begin to wear thin after a while because of how often it's used, and I was left groaning in annoyance after already experiencing them multiple times. Thankfully though, these are divided up in between plenty of missions that are much more varied and fun to go on. Some of my favourites included navigating through a town under the cover of darkness, killing soldiers left and right to free several prisoners, as well as those dedicated to the ship-based combat and finding your allies while holding off against countless waves of other vessels. But what made the missions more investing and what surprised me the most about Black Flag is how entertaining the game's writing and narratives were in comparison to the gameplay. The dialogue and confrontations between characters I thought were especially well done, and I was continuously left looking forward to the next bit of banter both in and outside of gameplay.
Julien Ducasse, I hope your conversion to our order is an honest one. I have no love for assassins, but even less for liars.
The dialogue is also bolstered by some pretty excellent characterization in its main cast. Edward Kenway in particular I found to be really likeable as the main protagonist, with an arc that did leave me invested from beginning to end. Unlike the more serious, pretty much humorless tone of Connor from AC3, which left many players divided, Edward has a charming, adventurous persona that made him more entertaining to play as, and his character is further made better by a wonderful performance by Matt Ryan as his voice actor.
You've caused no small portion of suffering yourself, Mr. Prince. Retribution, I suppose.
His motivations throughout the game and how he evolves with the world around him are equally investing, as he is at first rather morally ambiguous, and is motivated mainly by personal gain and to prove himself as a self-made man. It's only until he becomes one of the assassins that he begins to see the world differently, and after witnessing more catastrophic events, begins to start for a more just cause against the Templars. I was also left engaged with how his desire for wealth begins to collide with the changing attitudes of his own allies, including from his partner Adwale, who becomes more radicalized by the violence and injustice he witnessed from the Templars, and grows more frustrated as Edward tries to cling to his own selfish goals. Populating the main story are also several side characters you meet along the way, which are also interesting to learn from and fight alongside, like historical figures like Edward Teach and his mission to establish a pirate republic.
That you men are the pariahs of Charlestown, and I would profit better by using your organs for chum and your bones for char.
My biggest negative with Black Flag's story though is similarly to everyone else's I've heard from, which is the modern day narrative. Instead of playing as Desmond, who is gone in this game, you play instead as an employee in a first person perspective at the Templar-led company Abstergo. In this sub-story you are tasked with exploring the remaining memories of Desmond, who is a descendant of Edward, to uncover how Edward came into possession of the artifacts the Templars have been hunting for. Now, the idea of a machine that transports your minds to different periods or realities is one that I've always found fascinating, especially since it reminds me of some of the main concepts of the Matrix movies. And it's this aspect of the modern day story that I did find some intrigue in, but by its nature and execution, this subplot in no way compared to the experience in the Caribbean, and without characters or a story you can invest in, it immediately becomes way more of a distraction that forcibly pulls you out of a better game, and left me wanting to get back to playing as Edward at every time this happened. So after playing around 30 hours of the game, as it stands, I found Black Flag to be a highly enjoyable open world game that injects the series with a fresh new approach to how it presents its open world and improves and expands on its predecessor in pretty much every way. The stealth gameplay is great and the narrative is well written, yet the game is still held back by a general lack of difficulty, its shallow melee combat, and it could have used some more interesting side content and collectibles. So instead of trying to achieve 100% completion and uncover everything the world has to offer, you'll probably carry on to unravel the story, unlock the whole map, defeat the legendary ships, and you'll most likely be done with it afterwards, at least from my experience. But despite some of these gripes, it's nevertheless an incredibly fun game with a gameplay arc that's both unique and compelling, and may be one of, if not the best pirate game I've ever played. So if you're a fan of pirate games, love ocean exploration, and enjoy following a storyline with really fun characters, then this is still an excellent game to try out even if you still haven't already since it came out. Those are just my opinions on Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. I hope you found this video helpful. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, and I'd love to hear what you thought of the game in the comments below. And as always, I'll see you on the next video.